with our bi-weekly.
Okay, I had to get them on the air, so let me get to you here.
Go ahead, Amanda.
Okay. The wonders of technology, huh? But I'm so amazed about how technology just moves forward. I'm an elder, and I can remember dabbling in technology when I was really young and making that decision if I'm going to go through with this or not. And now I'm kind of like what you consider a techie grandma, I guess. But good morning, everyone. This is Amanda Takes More Bonnett Beauvais. I'm with the we do a radio show every other week. Several of us, Cecilia Fire Thunder, Stella Ironcloud, and a few others. We're with a committee with Oglala Lakota College on a project that they received a grant for. And the grant is they bring the stories back, connecting Lakota Wild West performers to Pine Ridge community histories. And what the grant is about is, so many times in history, we get our history written by other people. And that's how it was with a lot of the performers, our ancestors that went on these shows a long time ago. And they had the good thing about it that I always want to emphasize is that it was a show, it was entertainment. So with that, they used Native Americans, and it was a lot of like, one of the greater shows was Buffalo Bill Cody's Wild West show. And he had hundreds of shows all over the United States and across the ocean into Europe. And his show was representing the Wild West of America, not only, the Native Americans, but the Buffalo Soldiers and different other types of shows. And he would travel, and it was an entertainment value, and they made money. I was talking to an elder cousin about one of our ancestors that participated in this show, and she emphasized that it was a money-making scheme for them, she said. And our ancestors joined it because they saw it as a way of making money, and they came to realize that this is where it's going to be for the future. So let's go with the show and go discover what these white people have. And they land up going across the nation. They land up going across the ocean. And she talked about her grandfather participated in the show. And he said it would take days and days for us to get over there on ships. It was more than one ship because they carried a lot of people with the show. Plus they had their animals and their other show stuff that they had. So I just wanted to talk a little bit. That's what that project is about. Sorry, I got an alarm here going on. So that's what that project was about. And what this is really about is telling our perspective of the Wild Bill Cody show, to gather information from families and community members that heard stories from their ancestors, and to be able to tell those stories and tell our side of that, of what went on. And I know it's kind of like, okay, this happened a long time ago, and those people that participated are long gone, but those stories are still here. And that's so much true, because last week, 2 weeks ago, Cecilia and I were doing this show. And from that, we had people contacting us. Hey, I remember what my grandfather said. I remember this about a grandmother that they participated in this. And this is the story that went with it. Or I have this image of them, and we have this about them. And so that's what we want to be able to do, is to bring those stories to light, so that we are writing a piece of history of our ancestors by themselves. Now, today we're supposed to have Cecilia Fire Thunder on. She's on travel, and she was going to try to get on. And we also going to have Stella Ironcloud on. Hopefully, like I said, technology is a little iffy here. So if we could get her on, then it would be so awesome. Stella is like a walking historical, she knows so much history about families. You could just sit and listen to her, and she goes on and on about all this history about families. And we have a lot of elders that are like that in our communities. They know things. You probably have one in your household. You have an elder, and did they ever tell you stories about a long time ago? Because those stories are really important, right? Regarding whether they're about this Wild Bell show or just things that happened in history, because their lives represent what we're going through now. So it's important for us to know those things that they went through, because it's a part of us now. And I always tend to talk to them about that, and even in my work, that that I work with Native Women's Society of the Great Plains, and one of our philosophies is that in order for women to be safe and children to be safe, we really need to reclaim our sacredness. And so that's all a part of it too, is to understand where we came from, because if you know your identity of who you are, it helps make you stronger. And when you're stronger, then you're able to heal and you're able to move forward. So with that, we're still waiting for Stella to get on, and I hope she can make it
Amanda,
on.
just sorry to interrupt, but Stella is working on her way to get on and help with the conversation.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Eleanor. She's with the OLC archives there, the library. While we're waiting for Stella to get on, and I'm not sure if Cecilia is able to get on either. I know she's on travel, and she said she was going to try. I wanted to talk about a little bit about our committee that we meet with online with some people that have really done a lot of research and are from institution or organizations that know a lot about the Wild Bell Cody show, Wild West show. And one of them that we met with is Jeremy Johnson. He's from the Buffalo Bill the Buffalo Bill Center of the West in Cody, Wyoming, and they're an institution that has collected a lot of imagery, a lot of history. In Cody, Wyoming, there's two places. There's the center there that Jeremy's from, and then you have the museum that the Cody Museum, and I was able to visit that museum at one time, and it was really an amazing place to be. And what they did was, they collected so much artifacts from the show, and all kinds of things that Cody collected, and they made it into, and over time they added to it. So it really represents part of that show, but it represents a lot of our ancestors, what they had in terms of even the buildings, the teepees. And one of the things that I was really amazed by that when I visited there was actually a teepee there that was made out of hides. It wasn't the canvas type of teepee. And I don't know how they managed to preserve that through all these years, but I thought this is what actually that our ancestral grandmas carried around with us, this big piece of hide that was all sewn together. Could even imagine the weight of it, and it really got me to thinking about doing some research on, how our ancestral grandmas were able to do that. And we do have, Cecilia sent a note. She's not going to be able to get on today, which I figured because she's on travel, but we do have Stella on now. So that's really great. I'm going to, I've been talking to Stella about just summarizing what the whole project is about. And later on, I'm going to talk a little bit about what Jeremy Johnston talked to us about in our last Zoom meeting, where he talked about, the center, the Buffalo Bill Center of the Wild West where, you know, where they have all this information and imagery, and he kind of gave a summary of what they have there and what his version of what the discoveries were in there. So Stella
Yes.
is with us now, and I'm going to go ahead and let her talk. Are you ready, Stella?
Yes, thank you, Amanda. Sorry, I thought I was in a meeting and I had the wrong numbers punched or whatever. I'm not really too sure how this works, but somehow I'm here this morning.
Okay, well,
and,
we're great to have you here. And remember, this is radio, so we don't have to dress up or anything.
Right, I know. Well, that wasn't my problem, really. I was trying to get in this thing and remember passwords and oh God. And being 80 years old, I just get fed up with it sometimes. I'm just
Oh, I
not
can
that
imagine.
geeky, and it's just is so frustrating. However, that's not what I wanted to talk about today. And so my main thing is, well, I'll tell you a little bit about how I got interested in the Wild West show. When I was a little girl, my father had a trunk that belonged to my great grandpa, Chief Blackhorn, and he received this trunk after he passed away, evidently. And so we'd go through it, and he had all his paints, and they were all wrapped in really fine pieces of leather. And we, of course, as kids, would play with them with it, you know, trying to be real sneaky, but we weren't. And then there was photos and oh, just other things that he had in his trunk. Well, the photos really fascinated me, and so for years I carried these photos around with me, not really realizing their significance, and until I was out of high school and had time to reflect on them more. But my dad had always said I was in the wild. He said I was traveled with my grandpa Blackhorn and was in the Chicago 1933 World's Fair. And so that's where those photos came from. And so I still have those original photos. And what amazes me now that I'm 80 years old, is the fact that I was managed to salvage them all these years between floods, tornadoes, whatever, moving around. And it takes a lot of work to preserve these things. And so I really, really encourage anybody that may have a picture of their grandma or grandpa to get it to the try to stop by OLC or call them and see if you can come by and have your photos scanned. They will scan the photos and then they will have it, and then you take your originals home. They don't want your original photos. Everybody seems to think that that's what'll happen to their photos, but they don't want them. They've got enough of their own to take care of. But we do need copies of these photos. And I remember way back in the 70s, I wanted copies of the photos that I did have. And I was working for the California Rural Indian Health Board at that time in Fresno. And so I took them to a photographer because that's the only thing that we had then. We didn't have iPhones and all this stuff to take photos, instant photos. And so I had to leave my photos with them so that they could make copies of all the photos that I had taken in. So anyway, so it was a big process. And now it's just instantaneous. In fact, you could just take pictures of your photos and send them to OLC. I'm sure that they can, download them from there. However, so I got copies of these photos, and my dad always told me that my grandma's name was Stella, or Maddie, AKA Maddie Blackhorn. And her older sister was 13 years older than her. And her name was Emily Blackhorn, and she married Edward Ironcloud. Now, that's where most of the Ironclouds come out of, that grandma and grandpa. And then my grandma only had my dad, and then she passed away. And she was, in 1908, there was a picture of her in front of Wanamaker's, in that great big Wild West photo, where they're in Philadelphia at Wanamaker's department store. And so I ran into that photo in a Wild West book in the 90s, and at a library. And I didn't know that she was in there at that time, but Buffalo Bill is always in the middle of these photos. And right off of his left shoulder was standing my great grandma, Bessie Burning Breast Blackhorn. And then next to her was Chief Irontail. And then I was wondering how come they were in the middle of the photo, and then Grandpa Blackhorn was way over on the left, and half of the time he's cut out of the photo because he's so far over on the left. And so I was trying to figure out why he was way over there and she was standing by Buffalo Bill. Well, then she is the mother of my grandma, who's a little girl at the time, and she is kneeling in front, or sitting in front, around the chair of Buffalo Bill, and that's where he liked all the little children to be. So Irontail had a child there, and then Grandma and Grandpa Blackhorn had their daughter sitting on the ground there. Well, there was a little boy with a feather in his hair, and the wind is blowing, so most of the time you can't see my grandma's face. There, you know that there's a little girl or something in back of this little boy, but most of the time you can't tell what it is, who it is, or whatever. So it was years later that I was looking through another book, and I found another, this photo was from a different angle or taken by a different photographer or something. And I saw that it was her, and it looked just like my granddaughter, Cassie. And I thought, oh my God, that's why Grandma Blackhorn is standing right there, is because this little girl is kneeling right almost at her feet. And so that was my kind of entry into researching more of the Wild West show, knowing that my grandma, who I never ever met, was there at Wanamaker. So I do know that in 1908, they traveled around America, and that's basically all I do know, because they were at San Francisco, and that's where the one photo of them all sitting on horses with the ocean in the background is in some coffee table book. But anyway, it's led to this big research project for me. And so I used to try to save up and take trips 2 or 3 times a year to maybe Denver Public Library, or the NARA at Kansas City. Minneapolis, Minneapolis, what is it? Historical Society in Minnesota. And so I always try to go on these little jaunts every year, and I haven't been able to do that lately because I don't travel as much. But we do have computers now, and everything is on computer, seems like. And there, I think I've wandered around enough. So do we take call-ins or not?
No, I don't
Hello?
think, oh, we didn't set up for that.
Oh, okay, that's fine, that's fine. Anyway, if anybody has any questions, I suppose you can just call the library at OLC and leave your question with the Darlene or somebody, whoever answers the phone, and they will get it to me. So going back to computers, every once in a while, oh, maybe every 6 months, every 3 months, something like that, I'll type in their names again, because new things always keep popping up, and things that, you know, just coming out of the blue. So I think it was in 2022, around January, I was on the computer and typed in Grandpa Blackhorn's name or somebody's name, and up pops this picture of my grandma. And she is standing, they're standing in this photo now. She is standing, and then Grandma Blackhorn is right behind her. And then a few people over is Buffalo Bill. And so I said, oh, wow. You know, I just thought to myself, how great is this? You know, now I can finally see her face without that feather in it. And it's just great to see this little 8-year-old girl. So anyway, I got to the bottom of the page that I was on, and I don't even remember what page it was, but wondering where they found this photo. Well, I couldn't get into their address or whatever, and to ask them if I could get a copy of this photo, buy a copy, or if they could send me a copy or something. And, or if it was in a book, let me know, and then I could go from there. Well, I couldn't, so I called Tawa, and I said, you have a much better address than I do, because people will pay attention to olc.edu, whereas me, they're just gonna, you know, it's just another name out of the blue. So I asked her if she could try to find a place, or how to an address for me to get back into this site so that I could ask them about this photo. And she said, okay. And that was the last I heard about it. And that was January, February. Well, Mother's Day comes along, and Tawa said, I'm going to bring over your Mother's Day present. And so I said, oh, good. All right. And she comes, and she has this, it's almost, well, it's a good yard long. It's, so I didn't know what it was, and I unwrapped it, and it was this photo. And it's the whole Wild West show standing there in 1908. So, and she had she had begged, borrowed, or stolen this photo. I'm not too sure how she got it, but I think she asked them, and they said they don't sell the photos anymore. And but she told them that that was my grandma standing in the middle of this photo. And somehow or other, I don't know if she bought it or whatever. So I have a copy of this photo, and I keep forgetting to ask her if she kept a copy for archives. So you find these photos of different people in the strangest places. I mean, to me, they're strange, because I would just be searching on the web, and, you know, and something will pop up that just amazes me. And I just think it's so wonderful that, you know, and people don't realize what they have. So, and it's not us, it's people out there, you know, out there in the World Wide Web. They don't realize the photos or the information that they have, or a souvenir from, you know, somewhere, Los Angeles or somewhere, and, you know, that belong to their great grandparents, and it's in a scrapbook or something, you know. And so they have all of this stuff is out there, and you just have to be diligently searching for it most of the time. But so that was a very nice Mother's Day present, probably the best Mother's Day present I ever received, because I finally had a photo of my grandma. And so I took a picture of her and stuck it on my phone. And so when I turned my phone on, there she is looking at me. And it's nice to look at her because I never knew what she looked like for about 75 years. So that was just so wonderful to find this. But another thing that I wanted to talk about was a lot of people, we were used to going to cemeteries, and because we're so small here and so connected to everybody, and going to funerals, we just grow up with it as part of our lives. But when you're out in the world, a lot of people maybe only go to 2 or 3 funerals in their whole lives. And so they don't go to cemeteries that often. And whereas we seem to be at a cemetery 6 times a year or more. One of the things that I would encourage a lot of people to do is when they are at a cemetery, take photos of the tombstone, or the tombstones in your family, because there is so much information on those tombstones. You have a birth date, you have the death date, you have maybe their Lakota name, you have their real name. Maybe you called him Skeeter all those years and find out that his name is really Laverne or something. And so there's just a lot of information. And there's a program or a site out there called Find a Grave. And so I have never done it, but I have friends who do it when they go to the cemetery and Memorial Day or whatever. They will take photos and then they will upload those photos to Find a Grave. So now if I go into Find a Grave and I'm looking for, say, the birth date of my grandma, I can go to Find a Grave, type her name in and see if she's there, if she's in their database, and it'll pop up the photo of her tombstone, which is an inestimable gift, and it will give me the birth date, her real name, or her Christian name, her death date, and it might give other information there that, you know, that I never knew. So I encourage everybody when they do go to the cemeteries to be a little more observant of maybe their grandma's tombstone. I do know that my grandma on my paternal side, my father's side, my dad's mom, her birthday is September 7th. And then my mom's dad, and he's a Red Wing from Santee, his birthday is September 7th. And I just thought that was, wow, now I just can remember September 7th so easily. And you don't always need their birth dates, but maybe somebody is calling you in their family doing genealogy or something, and they want a birth date or something. So, and this probably just is good information for people who do genealogy. But let's see, the other thing that I kind of wanted to touch on was if you are doing your genealogy, to start with you always start with you, and then you work backwards. You don't really start with your great grandpa and try to work backwards. Censuses for Pine Ridge basically only go to 1888, roughly. And that's just the name. It's nothing else in there. Just a name, a number, and a name. And so if you're wanting more information, like who's in the family, who's the children, who's the wife, who's the husband, whatever, that's probably not there. So then you go to a later census in the 1892, I think it is, in 1893. They're more set up for who all is in the family and information about the family members. That's probably as far back as our censuses go. Not unless like your great grandma or something, which I found out by going through a 1930s ER, I think it's SDERA or something like that film, and ran into my grandparents, and she states on there that she was born in Denver in 1860. Well, how in the world did she get to Denver? And I mean, what was her mother doing there in 1860? And what kind of environment was at Denver then? Well, when you look for information on Denver in 1860, the only thing there was an army depot by the railroad tracks, which is now Laramie Square, and a large Arapaho village, a teepee village, and a couple of trading posts. The Rishaws had one, and you know, that was basically it. Denver was just kind of an outpost. They hadn't really discovered gold yet there, and so it wasn't this big booming town that you see now. It just, you know, was basic prairie next to the mountain. So anyway, so I made another trip to Denver, trying to find out more about Denver's history, and trying to figure out why my grandma, my great grandma, was born in Denver. But she was the wife of a lieutenant in the Army out of Old Fort Laramie, and so I'm sure that he was, you know, either, I think at that point in time, the Army is guarding the white wagon trains that are passing through. And so he might have been on assignment that way, and then she had her baby there. I don't know. But the other thing about Denver is that they have the Denver Public Library, and the Denver Public Library has every article that was printed by the Rocky Mountain News since the 1850s, I think, something ridiculous like that. anyway, so you can go there and whatever you can, if they had people or reporters out in the field there somewhere that were able to wire or telegraph back to the main office and have something printed in their paper about regarding Indians, then they have it. They also have, why I was interested in finding out about the Annals of Wyoming. Now, the Annals of Wyoming was a little, I think it's quarterly, or it was quarterly, a little magazine kind of coming out like the National Geographic or something. And it was all about stories that people wrote about, stories for Wyoming, the history of Wyoming. And so I was looking for that. And that's where I read about the hog farms. And the hog farms were, they were talking about the brothels around the army posts. So old Fort Laramie had the hog farms around there were for the enlisted men. And most of the officers had bought a woman. So they had women, but they were more proper than going to the brothel, I guess. Anyway, so in these hog farms, and I do think that Ekafee and Cooney and other names like that who were affiliated with old Fort Laramie, they probably had a trading post with a little bar and a brothel attached. But you can read about things like that in the Annals of Wyoming if you're interested. And it just gives you a little bigger picture about how the Wild West, or what was happening in the West, and how all these people get here. And that's one of the interesting things too about reading about all this stuff, because you find out that I think, what was his name? Oh shoot, I can't think of his name now. But anyway, he was a prisoner of war, and he was a Confederate soldier, and he was a medic. And I can't think of it. Phyllis. He had a granddaughter named Phyllis or something, and who was a nurse, and that's how I know her. But I can't think of her last name right now. Anyway, so they needed medics out here, and so they offered him to come. They would, he could come out here and not be a prisoner. He would still be connected, a Confederate soldier connected to Old Fort Laramie and the Union Army. And Mr. Koloff. Okay, so that's how they got out here. And it's really, really fascinating to find all this stuff out. I mean, for me, I find it very fascinating. Not everybody will. But anyway, there I am. I'm sorry I'm rambling on again. So I'll quit for a few minutes and get a drink of water.
Okay, thank you, Stella. Stella, that's always such good information that you're giving, though, and there's so much details to our history, and don't realize that that there's so many resources out there, and while Stella's getting some water, when we're talking about resources and looking for things, that when we did have Jeremy Johnston on our committee meeting, he's the works with the Buffalo Bill Cody Center of the Wild West, and he mentioned that that within the center they have over 1,000 objects related to the show. They also have a lot of things with the Plains Indians, and they have over 500,000 historical photos there at the center. And he mentioned that that a lot of them are not identified, or they're misidentified And the bulk of them are Lakota performers because Bill Cody used a lot of Lakota performers. He also used Pawnees and some other tribes, but the bulk of who he used in his show were Lakota performers. So that means that saw our ancestors there. And that's a tragic thing, Stella, in history that, when they were with the show, they got their pictures taken by photographers because it was, a show and it was an entertainment value and people went to it. And so these photographers wanted to show more of who, who was in the show, especially Native Americans, because at that time, Native Americans were thought to be, a vanishing culture. So they would go and take these pictures of the Lakota performers that were in the show. And sometimes they were given back for a fee to the performers in a postcard form or some kind of form. And that's what we see in our family archives now that you might have in a trunk, or your grandma might have, or somebody might have. And so the collection that they collected from the copies of these photos, they weren't identified who they were. And so a lot of times when we see that in the archives of the Cody archives and in the center, a lot of the historical photos, they're not identified. And I don't know if you want to chime in on this, Stella, but what is a way that, it's just like, who are these people? You see so many of them, and I just wonder about how
Right.
they, yeah.
Okay, so one year, I was living in Spokane then, but one year I wanted to go to the Cody Museum. So my mother and I went to Bozeman and made a trip down to Cody. And the main, this was, oh gosh, in the 90s. So it's quite a while ago. And I'm sure it's definitely not the same. But at that point in time, their archivist was a woman, and I cannot think of her name. But she said, it's almost lunchtime. Why don't you walk around and see if you recognize your Grandpa Blackhorn anywhere? And I said, okay. And I did. And I swear he was in almost all of these photos around this desk where they greet people. And, you can, once you know what they look like, you can just spot them, whether he was playing ping pong with others, on a break or whatever, his sister, Nellie Long Skunk, was also in the show, and that's the one that looks like my granddaughter Cassie. And I do know that because Long Skunk was in Italy and got smallpox. Well, his dad, Brave Hawk, made a trip to Italy, and if you can imagine, he must have had people go with him. But here's another story that I always found so fascinating was we lived in LA, and this is in the 60s. And my mother had to go take a driving test. And so I said, well, we'll all be downtown. I don't know what was going on, maybe an AIM meeting or Jane Fonda speaking or something. I don't know. Anyway, we're all going down to the downtown LA. And so I said, well, there's a place downtown where you can get your driver's license, Mom. And then we'll all be down there. So, we'll meet you there or something like that. Oh, I can't do that. I can't do that. I've never driven downtown in my life. And my dad looks at her and he says, Ruby, he said, if my Grandpa Blackhorn can go around the world, didn't speak very much English and didn't have any problems, surely you can go downtown and get your driver's license. And it was just so funny the way she says, okay. So she went down there and got her driver's license. But anyway, but so that just, you know, him saying that makes you realize that they didn't speak much English. And so how was Nellie's father-in-law gonna travel all the way to Europe and go see his sick son in Italy who had smallpox? Anyway, well, he does it, so he must have taken somebody, maybe an interpreter or something. He must have taken somebody with him. I have no idea, but anyway, he did get over there according to our family stories. And he's the one that caught smallpox from his son. The son gets better, and the old man Blackhawk dies. So he you know, how in the world did he travel all that way? You know, by boat. First you have to go by boat, and then probably multiple trains, and just to go see your sick son, you know. I mean, things going on in the Wild West show that you are kind of mind-boggling sometime, and then you think about how they did this and how they got there, and going down a canal in a canoe somewhere, you know. And it's pretty amazing, because it's something we'll never do, or I will never ever do. But the other thing is that, you know, you know very well that there are people in Europe who are descendants of some of these young single men, you know. There has to be. I mean, that's just the way the world goes, you know. And so DNA will pop these people up sometimes. And that's the other thing that I kind of wanted to talk on, was DNA testing. If you're not too sure, you know, I mean, this is one way to find out who in the world is on your family tree, through DNA. And I'm really for DNA testing for people who can afford it. Now, on the holidays, Father's Day, Mother's Day, Christmas, Thanksgiving, Valentine's Day, whatever, 4th of July, most of these DNA tests will go on sale, and they'll be half price. So that's kind of what I waited for when I bought my test about 5 years ago. Well, then, being an old person, I stuck it away someplace where I'll know where it is and it'll be safe. Well, I never found it until this year. So I finally did it this year. But what pops up immediately is everybody who has taken a test and is somehow related to you, whether it's fourth cousin, grandson, grandfather, whatever, that they pop up on your screen when you get into your DNA activity, or DNA history, or whatever you want to call it. But I just found it so fascinating, because one of the things you're going through there and saying, well, who in the world is this? I don't know who this person is. And then you look them up and or message them, and maybe they get back to you and say, you know, your Uncle John had a daughter, and I'm her granddaughter, or something, you know. We can't be not accepting these people. It's not their fault, you know, that they were somehow conceived, and maybe the mother took them away or something, or the mother didn't want to see the dad anymore, the dad didn't want to see the mom anymore, or something, you know. There's always something, or she was married to somebody else at the time or something, you know. So that's kind of what happened in my family. And so I immediately got these two boys, and it says a grandson on them. And that's how the DNA lists them, because there was so many, I don't know what they go by, dots or dashes or whatever. So there was like over 1,000 dots and dashes connected to me, from me to these boys. But these boys were my sister's grandsons. And so and her son pops up as, they don't even list him as uncle, brother, whatever. They just said very close related, because there's so many matches. And anyway, and then there's on there, there's another lady, and she doesn't answer the phone. I'm still trying to figure out how in the world I'm related to her, because is it through my dad or is it through my mother? I mean, she was the last person in the world I ever thought I would see on my on my DNA relatives. But anyway, so I find it very fascinating. Other people may find it kind of scary, and you know, if in that case, don't do it. But there is a paternal one, and and I want my brother to do it. In fact, I think he may have done it, and I'm waiting for the results now. But it goes from father to father to father to father to father. And if we're going back to Moses or somebody like that, you know, it's going to take you right back. And it may not go that far, but, you know, since most of us are connected to the French people in some way, it's probably going to lead us right back to France. And which, you know, leads to another thing, because, you know, people would come to the library and say, how come there's so many French names here, you know? And well, this was French territory for hundreds of years before Lewis and Clark and them came, and it was bought by Jefferson. So, you know, of course, there's a lot of French names. And the Métis ring, I don't know if anybody has relatives in Canada, and most of us do, because there are 7 reserves in Canada that are related to the Dakota, Nakota, and Lakota people. And so we would, you know, if you're looking for somebody, you might want to check out the Métis ring, METIS, Métis. And I mean, it's just, you know, there's like 10 different ways to spell Volandry, you know. And so they were all voyagers from the St. Lawrence River area. And, you know, and they have families out here, and they just stayed out here, you know. So, I mean, that was some of them. Other people get here other ways, by boat or canoe or whatever, but they, you know, how the Frenchmen got here, but they did get here, but most of them were trappers. And so, that's, you know, that's another place that you might want to check out. I'm just trying to, you know, because we do have, some of us have relatives in England from some of these young men that were there. Now, I I personally don't have any, but that I know of, but that's not to say that I don't. And then we know that there's a whole village of French people, French Indians, and they, you know, but they're, you come down how many generations? 4 or 5 generations. So they're not going to be looking very, very Lakota or anything, you know, and they may not even know that their great, 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 great somebody or other was in the Wild West show. But anyway, it's interesting. And brothers and sisters, you know, whole families would go. So, you know, maybe your great great grandma's sister went with her or something, you know. So, it's interesting. It needs to be followed up on, and I am willing to help anybody who thinks that they, you know, are looking for somebody who was in the Wild West show, and maybe they never ever talked about it, or you know, for some strange reason. I mean, a lot of people died over there too, you know, they got sick and died. One of the people, his wife was a bad wound, and that's how I met him. And they had gone to school with my mother. So, but his great grandfather was in the Wild West show and got sick in Austria, and he was in the hospital, and he met his wife. She was nursing him, or she was his nurse, or brought him his oatmeal or something. I don't know, but I think she was a nurse. And she, they got married, and he brought her back. And another man who married somebody from England was one of the Shangroos. And that's for those people in Bennett County, that Bennett County Historical Society book that they put out a long time ago, in the 90s, I think, is so helpful. I mean, it's just full of information, and I'm always it's one of my resources, you know, because it will tell you. So say it mentions me, and then it will say who my mother was, maybe, and my father, and so you can go from there. And it also has photos of all the churches. So Inestimable Gift is in there, with a big photo. And I found my dad. He was about 10 years old. He's goofing off in there. And Grandpa Blackhorn was in there. But and it was after, let's see, I think Grandma Blackhorn had probably already passed away. But it's also nice to know that that land that Inestimable Gift is on was gifted by somebody, let's see, who owned land around there. Now, Grandma Blackhorn and my grandma had land. If you're in the cemetery and you look to the east, and there's a big row of trees, their land was kind of further over a little bit, but visible, I'm sure, from Inestimable Gift. And my grandma, then my mother's mother, is buried in the Gamble Cemetery, and nobody's ever heard of Gamble. Well, where is it? And then you have to look up archaic villages or towns, and you find out that Gamble was had a post office, and it was located, and it was south of Boondocks on 18 and the Allen Turnoff. So she and most of her family are buried down there, and it's in the middle of a cornfield now. So You can see it when there's no corn, but when the corn is high, you have to look for a tree. And that cemetery is in there. But most of the people that lived down that way, that was called the strip then. And the strip, if you've never heard of the strip, was 10 miles north of the South Dakota-Nebraska line and 10 miles south of the Nebraska-South Dakota line. And that's where most of the mixed blood people were given land. So you'll find in Bennett County, you'll find everybody from Livermonts to, I was going to say Archambault, but it's not Archambault, it's Artichokers and Lesserts, Valandries. So all of those people had come from, a lot of them had come over with old Fort Laramie people. They had families there then. And so when they put us on the Pine Ridge Reservation, then they all came, and that's where they all got land. Now, they discovered gold in Colorado. So all of the LaPorte, Colorado people were all mixed bloods, families, Rishaws, Provosts, Janices, and or some of the three big names. But they were all, you know, we're going to take this land now, we need it, so you're going to have to go move, and we're sending you back up towards this way, and that's called the strip. So, or their women were given land or somewhere. So at that time, a woman was given a half section of land. Her husband was, if he was native, he was given a section of land, and every child was given a quarter section. So if you had like some of the bigger families, if you had a lot of kids, you could have like 3 or 4 sections of land already through the allotments. And that's basically how I tell if they were a very traditional family or not, because your traditional families only had like 2 kids, and they were far apart. You know, they weren't every 9 months, they didn't have kids. These kids were maybe 6 to 8 years apart sometimes. And that's so you could spend more time with this child, and that's why they call them sacred children. And so that's immediately when you're in the censuses and you see, you know, take for example a Mrs. Janis, and there's about 4 or 5 families of Janises, and they've all got 5 or 6 kids. And then you go to the next little family, and maybe there's only 2 or 3, you know. And so, you know, you can immediately see who are your mixed blood families versus your full blood families or a more traditional family. And so, anyway, getting back to the strip, are we still online? Or are we supposed to quit at 10?
I think you could go ahead and finish up. Yeah, we have it until 10.
Oh, okay. All right. So getting back to the strip, if about that time, then the government, there was a half-breed reservation. There were several half-breed reservations. So there was one in Prairie du Chien, Wisconsin. And then the other one was in, that I know about, where was in Rouleau, Nebraska, south of Omaha. And it went to Hamburg, Iowa, and across into Kansas and up into Nebraska. So it was right around the Missouri River there. And all of a sudden, then the government says, well, we're taking this land back, and you guys all have to go up and get your allotments up here on the strip. So that's how you get, that's where the Valandries, the Livermonts, the Babbies, all of these people, that's how they get back up here, is because they were they were enrolled down on the half-breed reservation, and then they ended back up here. But anyway, it's fascinating how people get here, how they ended up in the Wild West shows, whether they were a prisoner or just went on their own volition because grandma was going or something. But I find it very, very fascinating. And I hope that, those of you with photos and stories will somehow get them recorded, get them put down on paper somewhere, type it up on, whatever, and just tell your story so that other people in your family know, because you talk to a lot of people, they don't know anything because nobody ever tells them anything. And so we can't be too reticent about all of this. We have to be very open and just let people know that, and whether they want to know it or not, but mostly a lot of people are looking for their roots. And so thank you very much. Bye.
Thank you, Stella. That was good information. We rounded up to the end of our show, and I just want to mention that Stella talked about a book about Bennett County, and they sell those books at Martin Mercantile and Martin. I think they're like $10 a piece or something like that, $10 or $15 a piece. They're probably limited printing too. So, but there is a lot of information in there about what she's talking about, and that's a very interesting book. And then they did a second one, which is more of the people that are, our grandpas and grandmas, and more of the non-Indian side there. But thank you, Stella. And I just wanted to mention too that there was like 117 shows, like Buffalo Bill Cody show. And then his was the most popular one, and then we had the Pony Bill one that was under him, but there was just little ones that were always taking Indians and trying to do the same thing as that. And some of the resources she talked about, sometimes we have to pay subscriptions to those places, but what I found is that a lot of times they let you do a free trial for 2 weeks or 5 days or something, and then you sign up for the free trial. Then just remember to unsubscribe yourself before they charge you, and that gives you 5 days or 7 days to go look and find things, on Ancestry or, the different sites there is. And Stella also talked about DNA testing, and that has become a really popular thing. And of course, there is a lot of controversy about it, but some people think, we shouldn't be giving out that kind of data from our tribe, because that's our data and we're giving it out, and they can use it in the future for different things. And one of the main things that I heard about is, eventually they'll say, you guys aren't a whole lot of Indian anymore. So we've got the proof right here. And then that kind of makes us susceptible to our treaty rights. So, but sometimes they have holiday sales, and you could get something for $40 and get a whole bunch of information when you do that. But of course, it always costs us money. That's what the whole thing is about. And that's what we're talking about, the Wild Bill show. And that's what it was, a moneymaker. It made a lot of money for Wild Bill and a lot of people, and for our ancestors too, because they came back, maybe sometimes they didn't come back rich. They probably had to spend their money on food and doing things. And it was more of an experience for them than because I don't think I've heard of any family that came back and had a lot of wealth from being on the show. So I just wanted to mention that, and some contact numbers. We have somebody on it after us. So we just wanted to say, if you do, you can call Stella, or you can call the OLC archives at 455-6065, and they'll direct you in the right direction that you need to go if you're interested in, dabbling around in your family history. And so next 2 Thursdays from now, we'll be back on the air, and I'm going to talk a little bit more about the Center for the center there in Cody and what they have. And I just wanted to mention that, when I listened to Jeremy Johnston talk about this, it was really Cody performances set precedent for a lot of things that we see today or that we have seen, like the cowboy and Indian shows. He really relished in that, and people took off on it, that there wasn't a lot of skirmishes like that, or, the Pony Express, there was so many movies about that or whatnot, but that only lasted a year. It went flop. So, the different things that that show brought forth and people picked up on it, and the cowboys and Indians and things like that. So it was more of a drama based entertainment thing that he really he embellished a lot of things in his show, and we're going to talk about some of that. So thank you, Stella, for being with us. And
You're welcome.
it's after 10 and we went over a little bit, and we thank you, Melanie. And remember, this is our Buffalo Bills show. We're talking, we come on every other Thursday, and we're really trying to encourage people to bring that Lakota perspective that they have from their families of those performers. And it's been amazing to listen to the stories. So thank you, Melanie.